Welcome back to WSAV News 3 today at 11. Early voting is underway in Georgia. During the primary, we saw record-breaking turnout. Will the momentum continue in the runoff elections? That is one of the questions we posed to Dr. Geoff Bowden, Associate Professor and Coordinator of Political Science at Savannah State University, who is sticking around with us to tackle what's going on in these election streets. And it's a lot. It's busy. Thank you so much for hanging in there and sticking with us this morning.
Well, thanks for having me.
We're going to pick off where we left off in South Carolina because there are a few issues that we didn't touch on. One is redistricting and what role that plays in people turning out at the polls and the results that we're seeing.
Yeah, so the idea that you're actually going to get an election without having your vote sort of voided with a redistricting, a new map, is probably motivating for South Carolina voters to get out there and to actually get the work done. The South Carolina State House, did vote to draw a new map, but this was not replicated in the Senate, and so they decided that they would not redistrict at this particular time. The rationale that they gave was particularly interesting, that they wanted to make sure that everybody was included, and I thought it was a very interesting rationale. It was sort of a jab in the face maybe of the administration. Again, this gets back to what we were talking about earlier about South Carolina's sort of independent streak, and they have a pride with their sort of independence at some level. So did this affect turnout? My guess is, yeah. I mean, if voters have confidence that their state legislature is not going to change up the election for them, and they're going to make sure that the vote that people cast is going to count, that's motivating to help people vote, and that could be partly what's behind some of the higher numbers that we're seeing.
Another thing we want to touch on is the race for sheriff. P.J. Tanner retiring after 28 years in office. One of the things that one of the issues that stuck out around that seat is ICE involvement in that area and the contract signed between the Sheriff's Department and ICE.
Yeah, so ICE obviously extremely controversial department in the Department of Homeland Security at the federal level at this particular point. So the idea there that you're going to have local or even state law enforcement officials, but here we're talking about a local election, and sheriffs, most sheriffs in America are up for election. They're elected positions. So are you going to have alliances with this very controversial immigration enforcement group, or what they call an immigration enforcement group? If you're doing that, if you make that alliance, what you're doing then is you're inviting essentially a group to come in and potentially arrest people in your communities, people that do jobs in your communities, people that are your friends, people that have those sorts of alliances with the voters themselves, and that can become very controversial. We're seeing across the country in a number of different states and also in our own areas some aggressive tactics with ICE, and when you have those aggressive tactics that are sometimes constitutionally questionable, then you've got serious sorts of concerns for voters. And some of those voters are people that could be targeted, and this is part of the concern, because a lot of the people that are being targeted actually are citizens eligible to vote, and that matters. And so when your sheriffs actually make those arrangements, that is, you have to be open-eyed about what's going on there, and that's taking on a lot of controversy, and sometimes sheriffs will bail out. They don't want to deal with that, and so you'll see some more open seats. My guess is you'll see more open seats as we move along over the next year or two.
So we're going to hop back into Georgia,
okay,
and hop back onto redistricting, because after the election, the runoff election on the 16th, is a special called meeting by Governor Brian Kemp on the 17th to address redistricting and some other issues.
Yeah. I don't know fully and completely what's going to happen there. It's going to be an interesting debate. We've seen extremely contentious and controversial legislative sessions in other states. Tennessee, very controversial. When you take majority-minority districts and you break them up, you are essentially eliminating any representation for a lot of the groups that exist in your state. And whether or not you want to take on that responsibility is something that your majority party, in particular now in the House and the Senate in Georgia, this is the Republican Party, when you take that on, you're going to have to deal with the political fallout of that. And what's the political fallout of that going to be? It's hard to tell at this particular point, but to have a state like Georgia that is essentially a 50-50 toss-up in a lot of our statewide elections, you are taking on an enormous risk by diluting votes in particular districts. And when you dilute those votes, your own majority vote, in order to dilute the minority vote, you run the risk in what we call wave elections of losing all of that ground. And so these have various sorts of names. The whole redrawing process we call gerrymandering, right? The term that political scientists use when you over gerrymander is called a dummy-mander, right? You're actually trying to attempt to advantage yourself, and what you end up doing is disadvantaging yourself. Our state legislature is going to have to deal with all of that. They're going to have to think through all of those sorts of things if they're going to make it happen.
So we have about 1 minute left, but I have two questions, so we'll give each 30 seconds. Two big races. One is the runoff between Burt Jones and Rick Jackson. A lot of money, a lot of campaigning now, television campaigns on this race as well.
Yeah. So Rick Jackson, interestingly, carried a lot of the state. Burt Jones doesn't have quite the money. He does have the Trump endorsement. Rick Jackson self-funded in a lot of ways, right? So has his own money. So what's going to be interesting there is to try to figure out how those other votes that went to the other candidates in the original primary, how those are going to play out, and how do you court those sorts of votes. We're already seeing a number of commercials on TV where Brian Kemp, and this is interesting, Brian Kemp, the current governor, has aligned himself with Rick Jackson. And we'll see how powerful that endorsement ends up being. And this is an interesting play. So you have the President of the United States who's aligned with Jones. The current governor is aligning with Jackson. So it's interesting.
Okay, last question, and we have about 30 seconds, and that is the seat that was formerly occupied by Buddy Carter, District 1 congressional seat. Amanda Hollowell, Joyce Griggs, headed to a runoff.
Yeah. Again, we're going to have to see how all of the other votes for the other candidates can be courted by Hollowell and Griggs at this particular point. And so what I would like to see is campaigns, signs, looking around town, right? Since this is our district, we get an up close and personal look at everything that sort of happens with that. And so, yeah, what I'm going to be looking for is where are the endorsements, where's the money coming in. My guess is there that Hollowell is going to have some advantage there. Even though Hollowell didn't get as many votes, it's going to be interesting to see what goes on there. So seeing the Democratic Party in the local area line up behind one candidate or the other is going to be very interesting. Right. So that's what I'm looking for.
Dr. Geoff Bowden, always a pleasure talking to you. We never have enough time. You can stay up to date on political happenings leading up to Georgia's runoff next Tuesday and beyond on our website by going to WSAV.com/electionHQ. Stay with us. We'll be right back.